back to the Removing the Veil podcast. My name is Liz, and today we are going to be talking about some of God's covenants, as well as the prosperity gospel and the book of Job, and how all these things go together. So, to start off, I recently listened to uh, a video put out by Mike Winger that is kind of popular right now. It was a 4 hour video that he did on Benny Hinn, and he has been getting some copyright things on it, and not sure if the video is going to be taken down. It seems like it's not going to be taken down as of yet, but prosperity preaching is something I think that Zach and I have mentioned a little bit, but maybe haven't addressed fully. And I know that that's something that we both want to talk about at some point. But I just wanted to address it here just for a moment, even though it's not exactly pertaining to what I'm wanting to focus on, which is Catholicism. Um, it does matter because these churches tend to, or at least some of the pastors of these types of charismatic or prosperity gospel churches, tend to want to link arms with the Catholic Church. You don't see a lot of it yet, but you see some people talking about it. And I just think it's really interesting watching how all of these different things are unfolding. Also, um, wanted to talk about this because of the recent scandal, you could say, at James River Church in Springfield, which is very close to home for us. They had some sort of men's conference there and invited a some male entertainment that was inappropriate for a Christian men's conference, and it was like a big controversy. I I don't have a lot to say about that. There are other people who have done a lot more research, or this is kind of their thing to talk about, but I just wanted to mention it just because of where it's at, like where its location. I think I had like the same feeling about the um Hebrew Roots church that was like right down the road, but they've moved now. This is I guess, our mega church for our area. They do have several buildings, and I know that Bill Johnson spoke there, about a year ago or so, and I don't remember this church being very odd in the beginning. I knew a lot of, or at least some Christians who went there, like, especially to one of the locations that seemed to be pretty sound, and so I'm not sure what all has happened there, but there has been a shift. Um, like I said, it's a growing church and seems to be getting bigger and more popular, and it's probably because of these types of prosperity teachings, but not just those teachings, the teachings of like churches that are in the NAR movement, which it would be the New Apostolic Reformation movement. And if you've never heard of that, NAR churches will never admit that they are a part of that group, but their teachings are really focused on a lot of the gifts, the spiritual gifts, and especially around healing. And I listened to this podcast, or not podcast, this YouTuber, and she kind of talked about a little bit about why they have to kind of believe the way that they do. And a lot of it has to do with their eschatology, with them believing that, we have to bring heaven down on earth in order for Jesus to return. So what they want to see is the world getting better and better, and there being, more healing, more revival, um, and stuff like that. And so that's what they're always pushing for. instead of, just kind of accepting the reality of the world that we live in and being there for people who are suffering and, praying with them, always praying, for a miracle, but being realistic, I guess, about it. So, what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the faith aspect of these two groups, which some people would say they're separate. I would say they're all together because they all fall under the same teachings of something that's opposed to God. So, therefore, they are, basically in the same group. Because if you are not in truth, if you're not on God's side, then you are on the enemy side, and all of those false teachers and preachers seem to sort of be link arms as it is, and they sort of think the same way about a lot of things and teach the same things, and it's not biblical. It's not a biblical version of Christianity. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the faith aspect of this first before we get into the covenants. They believe that both of these movements, prosperity gospel and like the NAR movement, believe that you have to have this supernatural faith in order for things to happen. Um, and if you don't have the faith, then you will continue to be sick or be poor or whatever. While simultaneously saying that you need to sow seeds, which is giving money, and you can't give a little amount of money, it has to be a large amount of money normally. Um, I think in the video that Mike Winger did with Benny Hinn, he said, like, if you give $10, that's basically slapping God in the face with your little tithe or whatever. Like, it's, you know, you shame him or something like that along those lines. And it's, so you have to give at least $1,000, or you have to give, such an amount in order to sow a seed. There have been other um, people who are in this type of movement who will, um, like, there will actually be people or children, even like having some sort of spastic episode that might be demon possessed or something like that, or what they say is that. And they're saying, if you want this, to leave your family, or this, whatever, this family curse to leave your family, you have to sow a seed. And then it's like a mixture between like prosperity gospel and like deliverance ministry. It's just I mean, it's a mess, like when you kind of like get down into all this, but really it's all under the same umbrella. It all has the same spirit behind it, which is not, it's an antichrist spirit is what it is. I mean, it's anti what Jesus came to do and what Jesus taught, and it's so centered on, like, well, obviously the prosperity gospel is centered on your health and wealth, and it's all centered around you being, I don't know, like having your best life now, which is a very worldly idea. Even in like the NAR movement, it's about bringing heaven down on earth, right? So it's about having a good life now and having all your riches now and having heaven on earth now. And that is such a lie. I mean, even the devil is like, he wants us to just enjoy this world the way that it is, and always trying to convince us that this is a good world, or whatever this. And it's not. I mean, if you like look at the reality around you, it's not. It's a sinful, fallen world, and there's a lot of tragedy going on. And if we just ignore that tragedy and then want to just live in this fairy tale make believe universe that we've made for ourselves, or this fairy tale make believe world, and not actually address the real problems that people are having in a real way, it's 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 not helping anybody, and this also works for atheists, because then they can mock Christianity and say, hey, like, because basically the big faces of Christianity that we have that are advertised are false teachers. and preachers and big mega churches, and it's all just like a scam. And so atheists can look at that and point at that and say, look, this is ridiculous. Why do you believe in this? Be like, these people are nuts. And we can, I can even say that. I can be like, yeah, these people are nuts. They're not Christian. Like they have no, like they don't know anything about the Bible as far as I'm concerned. I'm not even quite sure if they've ever read it. I think they read it enough to manipulate it. They read it enough to take verses out of context and use it for their business or whatever. But in its essence, it has nothing to do with what the Bible says or who God is or who Jesus is. And so not only are you getting Christians who get caught up in this, or just people who say they're Christian who get caught up in this, and they get, led astray and led by wolves, and or you get atheists who just mock it and will denounce their faith altogether and just totally leave God aside and go for something else. Um, Especially when it comes to like certain types of healings where, you might get better if you just went and saw a doctor, but some of these people will refuse to go to the doctor. And, uh, anyways, that's like a whole other thing. But I was going to get into the book of Job last, but I might do it first just because I feel like that's kind of where we're going with it. So, this was actually like the last thing that I looked at because, well, I'll say this first. I was looking into the covenants for some reason. I can't remember. If I remember, I'll say it. But I was looking into the covenants and I was listening to something and they were talking about what a covenant is and how the covenants were like made back in the day. And essentially it was like the word covenant means to cut. And what they would do is there would be like some sort of sacrifice, some sort of animal sacrifice where they would cut this animal in half or in pieces or something like that. And then the two parties would walk down the center of this sacrifice, and that would basically start that covenant. Normally it was something more like um back then it was like a covenant between like a king and the people, maybe after like they had been conquered by like some new king, and so they were like having to like come to some sort of agreement under this new ruling. And so they would make like a covenant promise about how they're going to interact with each other, and this is how they would show, like this is something that they would do to kind of show them starting this promise, I guess. Anyway, so I was looking into like this, and I didn't know all of that about covenants. I haven't really looked into it that much. But then I was trying to find a connection between this and the Catholic Church. I ended up watching this video on this Catholic priest, and of course, after I watched the video of what he had said, it left me more confused than than understanding. Even though a lot of what he said like made sense, what it did is it left me with more questions. And this was the question, was that if because he basically was talking about the prosperity gospel and how, we can't always be prosperous. And he says, look at the book of Job or whatever. Um, and then I had all these questions about, well, what was Job under a covenant in my mind? Because the first thing that I had watched said like there's an old covenant and there's a new covenant. The old covenant is that you will be blessed or cursed based off of what you do. So based off of, if you follow God's laws or not, you are going to be, or at least his people at that time would either be blessed or cursed by God. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, if Job was under the old covenant and then he was a like essentially like a righteous person, he was doing the things that he was supposed to be doing, then he should have been blessed, but instead he was cursed. And then I thought, well, is God's will or what God wants, is it above his own covenants? Is it above his own promises? And then I'm like, okay, well, then you have a God who is chaotic because you never know what he's going to do because he doesn't keep his promises. And I just got like really confused about that. Well, I found out that it's not necessarily just, you can't just chop it up to an old covenant and a new covenant. There's actually several covenants that God makes throughout the Bible with people and then with his people. Um, I got a list off of another thing that I watched with Alan Parr, I think his name is, and he actually made this list or this chart or whatever. And he had 8 different covenants on there. And people, have their different amounts of covenants that they believe in. But he had 8, which I thought were really good. And so the covenant that I found that was uh the old covenant that these one people were talking about, that you would be blessed or cursed based off of what you do, is actually the Mosaic covenant. Let's go to Exodus 19 first. Okay, so let's just read 5 through 8. Exodus 19, 5 through 8. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. And the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. So this is called a um, bilateral covenant, which means that there are 2 parties who are bound by the covenant. And then if it's broken by one party, then it fails. So there was only one other bilateral covenant made, and that was in the Garden of Eden, basically the Edenic covenant, which is the first covenant that God made, was that um, they would have eternal life and live with God, but they broke that covenant when they ate of the fruit of the tree, and so that brought forth a curse of physical and spiritual death. That was the only other bilateral covenant besides the Mosaic covenant, which was a promise that they would become God's people, and they have to, but they have to like they have to follow God's laws, and they have to do the things that God says that, he should do. And they said, "Yes, we will do that." Um and it says if you don't, follow my laws and do the things that I ask you to do, then my blessing will be removed from you. So it's like it's the first works based kind of thing where it's just like, okay, I'm giving you these rules that you have to follow. And then if you don't follow them, then you're going to be cursed. If you follow them, then you will be blessed. The Mosaic covenant was around 1400 to 1300 BC. And Job was more around, um, closer to, Job was around closer to Abraham's time, around like 2000 BC. Um, Job was definitely not under the Mosaic covenant, which is a conditional covenant. The blessings are directly um, related to your obedience to the law. And also kind of going back to like what I had initially understood of like the old covenant, was about, being blessed off of what you do. So that was not something that he was under, but the Abrahamic covenant was a covenant that would have maybe been around while he was around, or it was just starting while he was around, and it could have definitely been after the incident that happened in Job. that the Abrahamic covenant even started. And there was a promise of blessing in there, but it wasn't the same kind of blessing that was in the Mosaic covenant. Let's go to Genesis 15, 9 through 11, and we're going to read about the Abrahamic covenant. Okay, Genesis 15, 9. So he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Um, Then he brought all of these to him and cut them in two, and laid each half opposite of the other. But he did not cut the birds. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. So this is the God, like Abraham, and God saying, Abraham, go get these animals, and then God having him cut them in two. So he's starting his new covenant. So we talked about what a covenant is. It's when you like there's a sacrifice and you're cutting it into two, and then the two members like walk through the middle. And then going down to verse 17, it says, it came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, and I'm going to read what it says, but the smoking oven and the flaming torch is God passing between these two, the cut pieces, and starting his unilateral covenant, which means that one party has to do something, which this party being God. It's not bilateral like the Mosaic covenant where both parties have to do something. This is just God doing something and making a promise to Abraham. And he's saying, to your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the Euphrates. Um, so he's going to give them land. And let's see what else. Okay, the covenant is continued in Genesis 17. It says, now when Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. So this is he already was giving him the land, and now he is giving him a lineage of people to come after him. And then he changes his name. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. So in the Abrahamic covenant, there's a promise of land, lineage, and blessing. The blessing is the new covenant, Jesus ultimately redeeming everybody. And it says in Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And that's for the people that are going to be coming out of, you know, Abraham's lineage. So, like I said, I don't know if I don't think that Job was under this covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, even because it doesn't say that God came and made a covenant with Job, so you can just take that. But there also wasn't like a covenant really taking place at the time that Job was alive. Like I said, maybe it was happening around the same time as Abraham, but more than likely, the story of Job happened before the covenant with Abraham. Therefore, God wouldn't have been breaking his covenant promise that he had made to anybody because there wasn't really one for him to break. The only ones that were in Job's time was the one that God made with Noah, that he wouldn't flood the earth again, that the sign is a rainbow, the the one that he made with Adam and mankind, which is a promise of victory over Satan and death. This happens in Genesis 3:14 through 21. And obviously, Jesus is the fulfillment on the cross. So that was something that hadn't, it doesn't happen till later. And then that first one we talked about, that first covenant that was made with Adam and Eve in the garden and then was broken, or made with Adam, I guess you could say, and then was broken and led to the physical and spiritual death. So Job is living in this time of physical and spiritual death, this time that has not been fulfilled. Jesus has not fulfilled anything on the cross as far as victory over death or anything. And also living in a time post the flood where um, God is saying he's promising that he's not going to flood the earth again. But God in this time is not promising that if you do the things that he asks you to do, you're going to be blessed. When we get into Job, we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more. Because it's challenging to talk about this kind of stuff because it does seem at times controversial. And I get annoyed with it, really. Like I wish the Bible was just a little bit more simple. I really do. And it's just like, yeah, I can see how people can take something out of context sometimes, I mean, I do it all the time and I'm just like, "Oh, this means this." And I'm like, "Oh, that's something new." And then I read it a little bit more and then I gain more understanding and more understanding and it's just like, "Oh, I guess, you know, anyways, I'll give you an example later, but um so Job was not under some old covenant that was based off of, your good works merit good things happening to you. And so that's what makes the book of Job so interesting too, because of him arguing with his friends and the things that they say about God, and then God saying that his friends were not correct about their assessment about who God is entirely. So, so God's will is always in line with his promises, I guess is the point that I was trying to get to there. One other thing that I thought was really interesting is that the book of Job and the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes have always been put together as like the books of wisdom, and so we read them together. They're kind of in the same section of the Bible. Like if you just have like a Bible on your shelf, they're kind of all in the same area, like in the middle of your Bible, but they don't take place at the same time. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon sometime before his death, and he died in around or 931 BC. So sometime before, around like 1,000 BC or something like that, these were written. Job lived like basically 1,000 years before that. So you can't, you know, when we're reading the book of Job, we have to remember at what time it took place and also like what covenant was he under. Like all of this kind of changes the way that you read it because like when I was listening to that priest earlier, it was very confusing for me. It made God seem like, okay, well, if there's just this old covenant and new covenant, and Job is under the old covenant, and if he's supposed to be blessed for doing the right thing, and then he wasn't, he was cursed, it's like that's just very confusing. And also, how does God break his own, covenant in order to just, how does he supersede his own promise to then like do his own will? Like it should all align, like it should all make sense because God is not the author of confusion. And so we kind of have to look into these things a little bit more to figure out like those questions if those are questions that you have. Okay. The reason why I bring all that up is because the book of Proverbs is a wisdom book that talks a lot about receiving good things based off of the good things that you do and then receiving bad things off of the bad things that you do. Um, which kind of, which was definitely in a different time, for a different people under a different covenant. Okay, so let's get into the book of Job. Go to Job chapter 1. I really hope that this is making sense. It makes sense in my head. That's all I can say. So we're going to read quite a bit of this because there's a lot in it. And we are going to kind of get back to how this ties into the prosperity gospel right here. And also kind of like that faith issue that we were talking about earlier. Um, because the prosperity gospel promises health and wealth, basically. And you'll notice here in like the first two chapters, those are the two things that the devil takes away. So, Job chapter 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and the man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And the man was the greatest of all the men of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When the days of feasting had completed their cycle, Job would send and consecrate them, rising up early in the morning and offering burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. So Job is offering sacrifices to the Lord, but he's doing them himself. There's no temple here. There's no priests or whatever, like what they have in the Mosaic covenant. So this is clearly before that time. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So I'm just going to say this as a side note because once you start looking into all this stuff, it's just crazy. So Satan is either Satan, like God's adversary, the person against God, or this is just one of the people against God. This is the Satan, is another way you put it, which is just somebody who is like against God. Some people will say that the Satan is like all like on God's payroll, but just um has like this certain like status. I don't know. To me, when I read this, I'm just reading it as Satan. This is somebody who is against God, somebody who is against God's creation. So that's how I'm reading it, and that's how I'm understanding it. It's somebody who is opposed to God. So, um, Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about the earth and walking around on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has. He will surely curse you to your face." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put forth your hand on him." So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that version, but I'm going to reread it in NLT. One day the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, "I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on." Then the Lord asked Satan, "Have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil." Satan replied to the Lord, "Yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. but reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, you may test him, the Lord said to Satan. Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Okay, so in Job 1 9 through 11, we see that the first thing that Satan took away from Job was his wealth. He said, you've protected him, you've made him basically prosperous, and so if you take that away, then he's going to curse you to your face. And so God says, okay, I'm going to give you the authority to take that away, but do not harm him physically. In Job chapter 2, there's a second test. It says, one day the members of the heavenly court came against to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser Satan came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil, and he has maintained his integrity, even though you urged me to harm him without cause. Satan replied to the Lord, skin for skin. A man will give up everything he has to save his life, but reach out and take away his health, and he will surely curse you to your face. So the second thing that Satan is allowed to take away is his health. The Lord says, all right, do with him as you please, the Lord said to Satan, but spare his life. So Satan left the Lord's presence, and he struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot. Um, in both of these instances, after they happened, Job did not curse God. Um, in fact, in the first one, he said, after all this stuff, like his house was destroyed, his kids were killed, and all that, um, he was grieved. Said he stood up and tore his robe in grief, shaved his head, fell on the ground to worship. And he said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin by blaming God. And then in the second one, um, his wife said, curse God and die. And Job replied, you talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? So in all this, Job said nothing wrong. So Satan took away his wealth, and wealthy is more than just money, even though that's kind of the main thing we think of. Like, he had all this stuff, right? But also took away his family. Like, you can be rich in like those gifts as well. Like, took away his children. Like, our children are a blessing. And then took away his health. So the things that the prosperity gospel is so adamant about, and also this like heaven now, response, like we're supposed to have all these blessings, all this health, all this wealth, all this prosperity right now. I just think it's interesting how those are the two things that Satan, I guess, knows, that people, I mean, want or need. And those are the two things that he takes away from Job. Now, Job did not lose his health and his wealth because he did not have enough faith to keep it. Clearly, Job has faith in God and even doesn't curse God after doing all this stuff to him, where someone like myself, I feel like I would be pretty upset. Be like, why is all this bad stuff happening to me? What have I done or whatever? Even though Job wasn't necessarily living under some sort of covenant promise, there was this idea that, you do the moral good things, and you do the things that God wants you to do, and you will be blessed because of it. And Job is having to realize and you notice like later on in the chapter when he's going back and forth with his friends and back and forth with God, he's struggling with this. Like this isn't something that just happened and he was just like, "Oh, I'm still good with God and then just good to go." Like this was really hard on him, like as a person. It would be hard on anybody. But what he gets right is that he initially does not, I guess, curse God for what he's done. He doesn't lose his faith. He doesn't, um, what did Satan say? He doesn't curse God to his face. And this is the most interesting part of this whole thing is that there's actually a third time. There's a third thing that the devil does. And I might be getting this wrong, and I'm not sure, but I thought it was really interesting. So in Job chapter 4, verse 12, this is his friend Eliphaz responding to Job, talking about God, how God, we can start at the beginning. Eliphaz's first response to Job. Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied to Job, "Will you be patient and let me say a word? For who could keep from speaking out? In the past you have encouraged many people. You have strengthened those who are weak. Your words have supported those who were falling. You encourage those with shaky knees. But now when trouble strikes you, you lose heart. You are terrified when it touches you. Doesn't your reverence for God give you confidence? Doesn't your life of integrity give you hope? Stop and think. Do the innocent die? Yes. That's the innocent do die. Um, when have the upright been destroyed? A lot. They've been destroyed a lot. My experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. A breath from God destroys them. They vanish in a blast of his anger. The lion roars and the wildcat snarls, but the teeth of strong lions will be broken. The fierce lion will starve for lack of prey, and the cub of the lioness will be scattered. Okay, this is the interesting part. Starting here in verse 12. This truth was given to me in secret, as though whispered in my ear. So he's telling him this is something that something gave me. Anyways, I'll keep reading. It came to me in a disturbing vision at night, when people are in a deep sleep. Fear gripped me, and my bones trembled. A spirit swept past my face, and my hair stood on end. It, of disturbing vision, like something whispered in his ear at night. A spirit swept past his face, and his hair stood on end. He was scared. The spirit stopped, but I couldn't see its shape. There was a form before my eyes. In the silence, I heard a voice say, and this is what they say. I think it goes all the way to the end of Job 4 and into Job 5. So we are going to read what this spirit says, but I want to tell you that when I read this, all I could think was this is not a spirit of God. Because it does say, um, closer to the end of Job, when God rebukes Job's friends, he rebukes Eliphaz and says, "You haven't spoke rightly about me." And I think it's because Eliphaz had this message from, was it from the adversary? Was it one of his like minions? I have no idea, but this message is not a message from God from what I'm reading. And it sounds almost like a good message. It's almost like it's saying good things about God or whatever, but it sounds a lot like some of the stuff they talk about in the prosperity preaching. It's almost like I'm just going to read it and talk about it afterwards. But this is what this thing said. It said, "Can a mortal be innocent before God? Can anyone be pure before the Creator? If God does not trust his own angels and has charged his messengers with foolishness, how much less will he trust people made of clay? Does that not sound like somebody who hates human beings? He's like, God doesn't even trust the angels or God trusts the angels. He trusts some of them. He has his own messengers. He has angels that he trusts. How much less will he trust people made of clay? Like, this person doesn't like people. They are made of dust, crushed as easily as a moth. This is somebody who does not like people. They are alive in the morning, but dead by evening, gone forever without a trace. Okay. Their tent cords are pulled, and the tent collapses, and they die in ignorance. Um, this is clearly an entity that does not find human beings worth much. They're easily crushed like a bug. Let's keep reading. Cry for help, but will anyone answer you? This is in Job 5. Which of the angels will help you? Surely resentment destroys the fool and jealousy kills the simple. I have seen that fools may be successful for the moment, but then comes sudden disaster. Their children are abandoned far from help. They are crushed in court with no one to defend them. The hungry devour their harvest, even when it is guarded by brambles. The thirsty pant after their wealth, but evil does not spring from the soil, and trouble does not sprout from the earth. People are born for trouble, as readily as sparks fly up from a fire. If I were you, I would go to God and present my case to him. He does great things too marvelous to understand. He performs countless miracles. He gives rain for the earth and water for the fields. He gives prosperity to the poor and protects those who suffer. He frustrates the plans of schemers, so the work of their hands will not succeed. He traps the wise in their own cleverness, so their cunning schemes are thwarted. They find it is dark in the daytime, and they grope at noon as if it were night. He rescues the poor from the cutting words of the strong, and rescues them from the clutches of the powerful. And so, at last, the poor have hope, and the snapping jaws of the wicked are shut. But consider the joy of those corrected by God. Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty when you sin. For though he wounds, he also bandages. He strikes, but his hands also heal. From 6 disasters he will rescue you. Even in the 7th he will keep you from evil. He will save you from death in time of famine, from the power of the sword in time of war. You will be safe from slander and have no fear when destruction comes. You will laugh at destruction and famine. Wild animals will not terrify you. You will be at peace with the stones of the field, and its wild animals will be at peace with you. You will know that your home is safe. When you survey your possessions, nothing will be missing. You will have many children. Your descendants will be as plentiful as grass. You will go to the grave at a ripe old age, like a sheaf of grain harvested at the proper time. We have studied life and found all this to be true. Listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself. So, if this is still this entity talking, and this is something that is opposed to God, I think somebody would read a lot of this and be like, that sounds good. Sounds like he knows what he's talking about. But really, this reminds me a lot of the prosperity preaching, saying things like, you're going to have all these blessings. You're going to live to an old age. You're going to have lots of children. You're not even going to be scared of wild animals. You're going to be safe from slander. These are not promises that the Christians get, for at least in this time, in this new covenant that we're in. We are told that we will be persecuted. And Jesus says, if they, basically, if they hated me, they're going to hate you too, and we're having to deal with a lot of different things, like as Christians nowadays. And so all of these promises of like that God's going to protect you from everything, um, I don't know, just some of the things that they're saying here, it reminds me a lot of like they will save you from death in a time he will save you from death in a time of famine. Yeah, I mean, God says that he will provide for our needs, but also things happen at the same time. Like there are things that happen, like it's not always um, in this life, you're going to have good things and miracles and blessings. That's not the case. Like our promises and our restoration, and I mean, there's even still death, right? Jesus came and fulfilled and started a new covenant and defeated death, but we still die. So when does it's the everlasting death. It's the death after this death. Like there is a time for prosperity and for all good things, but it's not in this life. It's not right now. And that's why this is so confusing, because yes, God is here for us in this lifetime, and you can, you know, pray to him and depend on him. I'm always dependent on him, that he is protecting me. In Jesus' name I pray for a lot of things, and I see the power of prayer. But this almost reminds me of like the prophecies from like the magicians and stuff like that in Old Testament, or whomever, like these people who are working for the king, where they always prophesied good things to happen. And that wasn't always the case. It wasn't true. And a lot of this is like you're going to have all this good stuff, all the time, as long as you are doing what God wants you to do. And it's just not true. It's not 100% true. So maybe, some of these things, some of these attributes of God, or some of these things God can do or would do, but it's not always like that. Like even like he performs countless miracles. Like, yeah, God performs miracles, but it's almost like even in like the New Apostolic Reformation, they talk about like God always heals. Like this just so reminds me of like stuff that they say. God always heals. Well, he doesn't always heal. Like, can he heal? Yes. Like there have been miracles and healings, but is it all the time? No, it's not. One other thing that I noticed is in verse 27 at the end. It says, "We have studied life and found all this to be true. Listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself." I'm just curious who the "we" is. As normally when there is like a group of, I'm just going to say demons, like together, they do identify themselves as "we," because there's usually many of them. Um, it doesn't say like I, God have or whatever. It just says we have studied life. So who is the "we"? It's almost creepy. Um, and have found all this to be true. And yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting. Like, who is that? Who's talking? Who is the one who is studying life? And I think we know that the enemy has been around for a long time, and it has been studying life for a long time. And he knows, right? He's the one that took away the two things that he also knows people desire. And then also today deceives people with those same two things: prosperity, um, wealth, and health. It's really interesting. Anyways, I know there's a lot that I could like sit here and talk about. I want to go over to I'm just going to pull up a couple of these Bible verses from Job that I guess stuck out to me, and try to remember what the heck I was talking about. Job 6:26. "Do you think your words are convincing when you disregard my cry for desperation?" Yeah, I read that. This is his response to Eliphaz's speech, or the speech of this entity gave him. I don't even know. And he says, "Do you think your words are convincing when you disregard my cry of desperation?" And when I read that, I thought about how God wants us to be there for the poor, be there for the needy. And when somebody is going through something, not sitting there and telling them, "You just don't have enough faith." If you had enough faith, and if you didn't doubt or whatever, which is what Jesus said at one point about faith, but that is completely taken out of context, I'm sure. But what God wants above all is for us to be there for each other and love each other in our circumstances that we're in. And he's sitting here getting this lecture from his friend saying, if you would just do the right thing, Job, then this wouldn't happen to you. And he's like, you're not even listening. You're disregarding my cries of desperation. You're disregarding what I'm even telling you right now. You're not being there for me as a friend. Um, Job 7:2. Like a worker who longs for the shade, like a oh no, yeah, 1 and 2. Yeah. Job 7, 1 and 2. Is not all human life a struggle? Our lives are like that of a hired hand, like a worker who longs for the shade, like a servant waiting to be paid. That is the Christian life. That is the life that most of us live if we would just be honest about it. I mean, I don't know. Just take this with a grain of salt or whatever if you want. But life is a struggle. We all struggle. I mean that's the thing that brings us together. We can understand each other in our struggles, and we're supposed to be there for each other in our struggles. But if we have to sit here and put on a face and say everything's good, I'm believing, I'm having faith that everything's going to be healed and everything's going to be roses and daisies and heaven on earth, and just having to, like, it's a lie. Like, you're lying to yourself and you're lying to the people around you, and you can't actually form relationships that way, and you can't find people and have groups of people together to pray for one another, and to be there for one another when you're not being honest with each other about what you're actually going through. Churches nowadays are not about that for some reason. The fellowship is so shallow and the messages are so weak, and we just, like, we have to, like, pursue, we have to keep carrying on, with this, like, smiley face attitude, when really what we're all doing is struggling. And we just need to be there for each other and be able to say, like, I'm sinning here, I'm struggling here, pray for me here, and be really vulnerable and honest with each other. It would be nice. It'd be a nice change. Job 7:20 through 21. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, O watcher of all humanity? Why make me your target? This is Job talking to God. Am I a burden to you? Why not just forgive my sin and take away my guilt? For soon I will lie down in the dust and die. When you look for me, I will be gone. Why not just forgive my sin and take away my guilt? I think that was the thing that stuck out to me, because he is sitting here, um, not yet, even hearing about probably the Abrahamic covenant where God is promising a blessing of redemption for him. And obviously not living in a time with Jesus Christ, when Jesus Christ has come and fulfilled a lot of things and given us the gospel of grace, which is God just forgiving our sins and taking away our guilt. That is grace. That is what God gives us in the new covenant. Job is asking for something that is not attainable yet, but it will be in the future. Um, Job 8:4 through 7. This is one of the other friends' response. This one is so hurtful. When I read this, I was like, this is terrible. Your children must have sinned against him, so their punishment was well deserved. His children died. He lost his children, and he's like, they deserved it. They sinned. This is like, I'm just going to compare it to prosperity for a minute since that's what I'm on, but it can be compared to a lot of things. This is like saying, you didn't have enough faith for your healing, and or that person didn't have enough faith for their healing and they died, and that's their fault because they didn't have enough faith. What a horrible thing to say. Um, yeah, this is a terrible mentality to have. You sinned, therefore you deserved it. And what a lack of humility on their part, since we're all sinners. Um, But if you pray to God and seek the favor of the Almighty, and if you are pure and live with integrity, He will surely rise up and restore your happy home. And though you started with little, you will end with much. That sounds a lot like prosperity. Um, if you sow a seed, then He will restore you. Um, he will give you even more than what you had. I don't know. I guess that's kind of what I read when I read that. And then I only went up to Job 9 because it's such a long. Job is so good, but it's so long and there's so much to break down. And this is Job's third speech in response to Bildad. He even says, it says, then Job spoke again, yes, I know all this is true in principle, but how can a person be declared innocent in God's sight? That's by what Jesus did on the cross. He's asking really good questions. Um, If someone, I'm just going to keep reading. If someone wanted to take God to court, would it be possible to answer him even once in 1,000 times? For God is so wise and so mighty, who has ever challenged him successfully? And I wanted to say, too, that he does say that he understands some of the things that Bildad says, which we didn't go over everything that he said. Obviously, some of the things he said were just wrong. But he said, obviously, he said some of the things that you said, were true in principle. Anyways, so I'll get to that in just a second. But without warning, he moves the mountains, overturning them in his anger. He shakes the earth from its place, and its foundations tremble. If he commands it, the sun won't rise and the stars won't shine. He alone has spread out the heavens and marches on the waves of the sea. He made all the stars, the Bear, the Orion, the Pleiades, and the constellations of the southern sky. He does great things too marvelous to understand. He performs countless miracles. Yet when he comes near, I cannot see him. When he moves by, I do not see him go. If he snatches someone in death, who can stop him? Who dares to ask, what are you doing? And God does not restrain his anger. Even the monsters of the sea are crushed beneath his feet. So who am I that I should try to answer God or even reason with him? Even if I were right, I would have no defense. I could only plead for mercy. And even if I summoned him and he responded, I'm not sure he would listen to me. For he attacks me with a storm and repeatedly wounds me without cause. He will not let me catch my breath, but fills me instead with bitter sorrows. If it's a question of strength, he's the strong one. If it's a matter of justice, who dares to summon him to court? Though I am innocent, my own mouth would pronounce me guilty. Though I am blameless, it would prove me wicked. I am innocent, but it makes no difference to me. I despise my life, innocent or wicked. It is all the same to God. That's why I say he destroys both the blameless and the wicked. When a plague sweeps through, he laughs at the death of the innocent. The whole earth is in the hands of the wicked, and God blinds the eyes of the judges. If he's not the one who does it, who is? I just want to pause for a second because he's saying, he attacks me with a storm and repeatedly wounds me without cause. He says that, and then he says, he laughs. He says, when a plague sweeps through, he laughs at the death of the innocent. The whole earth is in the hands of the wicked, and God blinds the eyes of the judges. If he is not the one who does it, who is? All these evil things. Um, God is not evil. Clearly, Job does not understand the fight that we're against is against, the principalities and things that we can't see. So clearly, he doesn't understand who Satan is or who God's adversary is. I'm not. I'm not sure how he gets to this point, but we know who God is. We have a much deeper revelation of who God is because we have more of his word. We have what Jesus did and all New Testament and everything that was said. He's asking really good questions. Again, he's asking good questions. He says, where, why can't you just forgive me? And you must just be up there. You're doing this, you're in charge. And this is, so you must just laugh at people when a plague hits and you must not care. Clearly you don't care. You don't care that I've done the right thing and you're just doing this to me anyways. In a sense, like that's fair because, I mean, ultimately God is in control, right? But it was at the urging of Satan that he wanted to do these things. This is the enemy who wants to do these things to us, not God. He is not the one who does it. He he gave Satan permission. We saw that. He gave Satan permission. Satan is the one who did it. So, to answer Job's question, it was Satan. It wasn't God. He says, "My life passes more swiftly than a runner. It flees away without a glimpse of happiness. It disappears like a swift papyrus boat, like an eagle swooping down on its prey. If I decided to forget my complaints, to put away my sad face and be cheerful, I would still dread all the pain, for I know you will not find me innocent, O God. Whatever happens, I will be found guilty." So what's the use of trying? This is something too. Job is, even God said that Job was like a righteous man, a good man. He's saying he's innocent. But we know that all men have sinned. All men are in a fallen, sinful nature. So, in some respect, I don't think Job fully understands his sin nature. Yes, he's a morally good person and he follows, God's laws, which in Old Testament, Old Covenant, that's kind of all that was required. I don't quite know how it, honestly, I don't really quite know how it worked. Some people were just found innocent and some people weren't. Um, what he's saying is like the thing I was doing is not working. Like it doesn't matter if what I do, you're just going to find me guilty either way. So what's the use of trying? Well, I know at least from my understanding of the new covenant, it's not about what we do. It's not about the things that we do. What we do is nothing. It's about what God did and it's about what he did through his son Jesus. And that is what makes us right with God. It doesn't have anything to do with us. So he says, even if I were to wash myself with soap and clean my hands with lye, you would plunge me into a muddy ditch, and my own filthy clothing would hate me. God is not a mortal like me, so I cannot argue with him or take him to trial. If only there were a mediator between us. Someone who could bring us together. I just feel really bad for him because I feel like he doesn't understand. I know that makes me seem like I'm like really prideful or something, like I'm so knowledgeable or something. But it's just like I really just don't think that he understands that like God is going to do something. Some people would say, well, it's God's fault that he's suffering. And I get where you're coming from, but ultimately we're all suffering. We can all at some point in our lives relate to Job. Maybe that's why God did it. Maybe that's why God took away so much, so that we would have something to compare our losses to. This could have been you or me or us, confused, giving up hope, and depressed. And he lost more than what any of us, like, he lost more than anyone that I can ever think of has lost. He lost everything. And all he wants is just somebody to come in and mediate between him and God, to help him understand and to show him what's going on. He's just confused and suffering. And Jesus is our mediator. We are so blessed that we have a mediator. And he just didn't have him yet. He was coming, but he wasn't there yet. And I just feel really bad for Job. And it makes me think about just how horrible living this life would be without Jesus, and how what he did was so fulfilling for us that we can go directly to God, and that we can understand God better through what Jesus did. And we don't have to live the way that Job did. We don't have to think about God the way that Job did. Him thinking that God doesn't care about him. God was probably miserable watching this. God loved Job. He loved him. He was proud of him. But he did, in his will, use him. He used him as a lesson for all of us. And yes, in the end, he blessed him. And some people are like, well, that's not good enough because he lost everything. Well, guess what? This life isn't fair. You're going to lose things. You're going to lose precious things. You're going to lose family members. You know, are you going to let the Satan or whatever, are you going to let the adversary win and say, "Look, God, you took it away. They cursed you right to your face." I think like that's the main lesson here. And then in Job 42, the Lord does end up rebuking Job for some things. Um, but he also rebukes his friends. Eliphaz, he says specifically, "I'm angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me, as my servant Job has." So Eliphaz, this is a little further down. So Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite did as the Lord commanded them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. He told them to offer a sacrifice, and Job would pray for them, and that would help them. But Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar were wrong. He says it 2 times, "For you have not spoken accurately about me." Now, when I first read this, I thought, oh, so I can take everything that Job is saying and be like, Job's got it right, and then everything that these people are saying and being like, they have it wrong. So I can read about what Job says about God and say, that's who God is. And then I can read about what his friends said about God, and that is, not who God is. That's not entirely true. There were certain things that his friends said that could be God, but not entirely. It wasn't accurate, right? It wasn't 100% accurate. There was some lies in there, clearly, like what we read at least about Eliphaz. He had a spirit telling him lies. And then we just read in Job in chapter 9 how Job is saying these things about God that are not true about God. God cares a lot. So I wanted to go in conclusion. I wanted to go to 1 Corinthians. Let's go to 13. Love is the greatest. I'm sure you guys have heard this. Love is patient. And verse 4, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud. I'm going to read this, but I want you to know that God is love. So we're just going to replace the word love with God, because the enemy really wants you to not understand who God is and wants you to read a book like Job and see like a hateful, manipulative God who just makes bets with the devil, and that's not at all what's going on. So, God is patient and kind. God is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. God does not demand his own way. God is not irritable. God keeps no records of being wronged. God does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. God never gives up. God never loses faith. God is always hopeful, and God endures through every circumstance. And then it says prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. God will last forever. So, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.